Welcome to the first video of Mastering Bitcoin Cash. This is going to cover the Mastering Bitcoin book by Andreas Antonopoulos, but show how it's applied to Bitcoin Cash, and the target audience is JavaScript developers. So before I dive into the book, I wanted to make this first video about just sort of giving a high-level overview of what I'm going to cover, and discuss just sort of the broader aspect of Bitcoin, the protocol, before we zoom in to the technical details. So this is part one, an introduction. So what I'm going to cover in this video is where to find the book, because it's expected that I'm going to go chapter by chapter. Each video is going to cover a different chapter. So the idea is for you as a software developer to read the chapter and watch the video, and they complement one another. I'm going to cover the differences between the book and these videos. I'm also going to talk about Bitcoin, the protocol, and blockchain, the database. I'm also going to cover other Bitcoin forks besides just Bitcoin Cash and BTC Bitcoin. I'm also going to touch on Testnet in this video, because that's a subject where a lot of developers get confused. And I'm going to introduce the JavaScript libraries BCH.js and the minimal SLP wallet, as well as the cache stack. Those are going to be some important concepts for software developers who want to get started and build useful apps. So Mastering Bitcoin, the book by Andreas Antonopoulos, was published in 2014. It's 2024 now, so 10 years later, the book is still very relevant. And it still remains to this day probably the best introduction for software developers to learn about the Bitcoin protocol and how to get started working with Bitcoin. So I've got some links here. It's on GitHub. You can read this book for free. And I have a shortened link with bit.ly there. That's a little easier to type. If you have a QR code scanner, you can scan this QR code. It'll take you to the link. They'll all take you to the same place, the book, where you can read for free on GitHub. So the book touches these very deeply technical concepts. It goes into elliptic curve math. I'm not going to get that deep in these videos. The focus of these videos is practical usage of the concepts using JavaScript. So my focus is going to be less technical. If you want the gory technical details, that's what the book's for. I'm going to show you as a JavaScript developer how to get started quickly, creating transactions and building your own ideas on top of the Bitcoin protocol. So what is Bitcoin? This is a simple question with a complex, multifaceted answer, depending on who you are, what context you're talking about. Like if you're a financial investor, the answer is going to be very different. So within this scope for software developers, I think it really helps to just think of the blockchain as a database in the same way you would think of as SQL or MongoDB or LevelDB. Those are all different databases. They go about the act of being a database in very different ways. The blockchain is a very similar thing. It's a very specialized database. And from the concept of like Web 2 app development, it's not a very good database. But what it is specialized for is censorship resistance. That's the main value proposition of the blockchain as a database. And we'll get into this as we go through the videos. So the way to think about Bitcoin as a software developer is that Bitcoin is just a protocol for writing to that database. So, there's a lot of answers to this question, but going forward with these videos, keep in mind that the blockchain is just a database. Bitcoin is the protocol for writing to that database. So let me touch on Bitcoin forks. So most people are aware of BTC, the Bitcoin, which has the majority of the world's hash power by far and is the leading market cap. That's one version of Bitcoin. So you'll often hear me sometimes refer to Bitcoin with a capital B or Bitcoin with a little b. Bitcoin with a capital B is the protocol, and it implies all these forks. They all run the Bitcoin protocol. And then Bitcoin with a little b is the ticker symbol BTC, which is an actual ledger and a coin, and one implementation of the Bitcoin protocol. So this picture on the graph shows some of the forking history of some of the forks of Bitcoin. So there's BTC, and then there's Bitcoin Cash, which forked off in 2017, and then eCash, which has a ticker symbol XEC, which is a fork of Bitcoin Cash, and I think they forked off in 2020. Anyways, I'm not going to go over this graph. This is on social media, can be found. But what's interesting about BTC, BCH, and XEC is that they maintained the same ledger. So if you owned BTC Bitcoin back in 2016, you have the same amount of Bitcoin on these other chains. So it's similar to a stock split, because they all keep the same Genesis block, the same original ledger. And so that's an interesting thing. Like, I gave some paper wallets to some family back in like 2013. And so they kept them. And so the private key on that same paper wallet unlocks the same amount of Bitcoin on BTC, BCH, and XEC, as well as like Bitcoin Gold and BSV, which are pretty much defunct blockchains at this point. Like, and that's another important thing about a blockchain. It can't be killed. It cannot die. As long as there is one person in the world using it, running a full node, the blockchain can't be killed. It can't be changed. It can't be manipulated. The data on it is immutable. So that's an interesting thing. There are other forks, including Nexa and Radiant. These are both forks of Bitcoin Cash, but they started with a brand new Genesis block. And so these are a little more developer friendly, in that the transaction fees are lower. And because they started from a new Genesis block, it's much faster to sync a full node. So these are sort of interesting things to look at as a software developer. So I just want to introduce these forks. The concepts in Mastering Bitcoin apply to all these forks. I'm going to focus on Bitcoin Cash as for the software side of things, software development side of things. But the software I use can largely can be ported to these other chains with minimal changes. So let me talk about Testnet, because this is a thing that confuses new developers. On BTC, it's so expensive and also for historical reasons, Testnet, which is like a separate blockchain, it's basically a clone of Bitcoin or a fork. That's where most of the development happens. But there's a lot of problems with Testnet. First of all, especially on BTC, Testnet coins can be very hard to obtain. Second of all, the testnet blockchain is huge, much bigger than the mainnet chain. So if you're trying to sync a full node, it's going to take much longer, and it's going to take way more hard drive space. Also, the network rules on testnet are different than on mainnet. You can do things on testnet that you cannot do on mainnet. So if you develop software on testnet, and then you go and try to use it on mainnet, I've seen a lot of developers run into issues with that because they thought that they were the same, and they're not the same. There's a lot of rules on testnet that don't apply on mainnet, and I've seen a lot of developers go really far in their development, and then it's all wasted because some assumptions that they made on things that worked on testnet just simply do not work on mainnet. So and then there's this other issue where when a miner, like a large industrial miner, comes online, they will typically mine empty blocks on testnet for days or weeks as they bring all their infrastructure online before they actually move to mainnet. And during that time, it completely disrupts a software developer's ability to work with the testnet chain. So for all these reasons, I discourage the use of mainnet. I think it's better to use a fork like eCash or Bitcoin Cash, where the transaction fees are low, and and then you're really working with mainnet. If you write software that works there, it's going to work in production. So that's why I discourage the use of testnet. Wanted to cover that here. So let me introduce some of these JavaScript libraries that I've written. BCH.js is a low-level library for working with keys and encryption. It's just lower level. And then minimal SLP is what I would call a high-level wallet library. So it leverages BCH.js, but it has very high-level abstracted calls like check balance, send Bitcoin Cash, send tokens, like very high level where as a developer, you don't have to think so hard about the low level details. So they're very complementary to one another. And if you use minimal SLP wallet, it has BCH.js inside of it. So that's really the only library you need to use. So let me show. This is the Mastering Bitcoin book. This is where that link and QR code I showed earlier is going to take you. This is how you can access the chapters. Click on each chapter, you can read it. This is the BCH.js library on npmjs.com. So if you want to read through it, feel free to do that. This is the minimal SLP library on npm. So just wanted to show where they're at and show that they have readmes and examples on how to get started using this if you want to just dive right in. Let's see. Oh, I also want to introduce the cache stack. You can find that at cachestack.info. And this is the backend infrastructure. And by backend infrastructure, I mean a full node, a fulcrum indexer, which tracks UTXOs, address balances, and transaction histories. The full node does not do that natively. It needs an indexer for that, and that's what fulcrum does. And then there's the SLP indexer, which tracks SLP tokens on the Bitcoin Cash chain. And SLP tokens also exist on the eCash chain, same protocol, so that's kind of nice. You can use them on two different chains. It includes a REST API, so basic Web 2.0 JavaScript development type usage. Provides a REST API for accessing that. That's what minimal SLP wallet library interacts with. And more recently, we're adding IPFS file storage support. So you can pay some PSF tokens to pin your IPFS content, and that's useful for things like token icons and using a token, like creating an NFT to represent some larger file. So those elements are what make up the cache stack. But largely from a hands-on use, it's the back end that minimal SLP wallet uses to talk to the blockchain, broadcast transactions, check wallet balances, things like that. So that's the introduction. The next video will focus on chapter 4 of Mastering Bitcoin. Chapter 1 is an introduction, 2 is an overview, 3 talks about specifically Bitcoin Core, which is for BTC Bitcoin. So I'm going to dive in the next video right into keys and addresses. This very important concept that you have to master before you can move on to the more complex concepts like creating an HD wallet or sending transactions. So that'll be the next video. Encourage you, if you're a software developer, to join our Telegram channel. So if you put in t.me, it's on Telegram /BCHJS toolkit with those underscores. If you have technical questions, that's the place to go to ask them. There's a lot of developers in there that will help you along. Thank you for watching to the end. My goal is to increase crypto education and to help more developers build software using blockchains. I do produce these videos for free, but I do have expenses. And so if you'd like to support me, I do accept crypto donations. The QR code on the left is for donating Bitcoin Cash, and the QR code on the right is for donating to other cryptos at cointr.ee/trout. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.